cake and biscuit, and they will be offered to colleagues at an appropriate time this morning.
That's a bit mean, actually, eating it in front of everybody on the screen, isn't it?
Normal service will be resumed.
Yeah, back to normal, aren't we?
Okay, everybody here? Shall we commence the meeting then? We'll start with welcome and introductions. Paul, can you let me know the apologies, please?
Thank you, Mike. Yes, we've got apologies from Dr. Barry and Phil Woodford. I think we've got Louise here from Communications, and we've got Kathy Hay, Deputy Medical Director, on behalf of Dr. Barry. I think at this point there is a message from Dr. Barry. This would have been his last formal meeting, but I think Dr. Hay wants to pass on a message from Dr. Barry. So perhaps we could do that at this point, Mike, please.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Kathy?
Thank you. So yes, Shahidul's words were, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to the present and the previous members of the board for their support to the staff and patients over the last 2 years. This has been a challenging time for the NHS and UHMB with the pandemic, media attention and regulatory intervention. I strongly believe UHMB is able to offer good quality and safe patient care. Our staff are working hard to offer the best, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. I think we need to formally acknowledge in the minutes all the work that Shahidul has done for the Trust in his time as Medical Director, and his continuing links with the Trust as well in his medical role. And we pay our due respect, gratitude and appreciation for everything that he's done. Kathy, if you could relay that back to him, please. We will put that in the minutes. And obviously this is the right point as well to ask the Chief Exec if you'd like to say a few words.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm pleased that Shahidul's taken a well-earned break for a week or two before he commences in his new role working with Health Education England and as a respiratory physician continuing with the Trust. I've had to kind of give thanks to Shahidul in a number of platforms the last couple of weeks. What hasn't taken me by surprise is the number of colleagues that have attended those meetings to thank Shahidul for his leadership and his support, and I'm pleased that the board is also recognising that. Dr. Barry has been a leader of immense integrity, tenacity, compassion, and has led through the pandemic with aplomb. And I think by his own admission now, it's the right time for him to regroup and spend a bit more time with that work-life balance and progress his other leadership passion, which is education development and kind of developing the clinical leaders of the future. So he leaves with our love and best wishes as a board member, but he obviously continues as a much valued leader within UHMB Teacher.
Colleagues, I'll give a few minutes if anybody wants to say anything. No, I think we've said a lot in the last few days anyway, and Shahidul had his leaving event last Friday. So Kathy, if you could convey our deepest thanks, gratitude, and I know many of us will keep in touch with Shahidul anyway, but thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Still under this item, item 149, report by the Good Governance Institute, that's been deferred to the November board, just so that we can have a few more minutes to discuss their report to us. So we'll move on then, colleagues, to item 133, minutes of the Board of Directors held on the 29th. You can see, I hope, a recommended change to the minutes regarding the Lancashire and South Cumbria pathology collaboration. At last month's meeting, the board approved the nomination of the Chief Operating Officer and Medical Director. It's been suggested since that the UHMB nominees are the Chair and Chief Executive to be the nominated members of the Pathology Board, with the nominated deputies being the Chief Operating Officer and the Deputy Chair. This then brings us in line with what the other trusts in Lancashire and South Cumbria are doing. So we're asked to approve the above amendment to the minutes held on the 29th. So just go through it again. It would be myself and Aaron that would represent the trust on the pathology board, and our nominated deputies would be the coup for Aaron and the deputy chair for me.
But on a matter of process, Chair, we're not approving an amendment, we're approving a change, aren't we?
Yes.
So, yeah, so we're actually approving, we're changing our decision.
Yeah. Colleagues?
Only to say that was my error, board. In presenting the paper, there was a difference between the pathology board i.e. the pathology committee that this board agreed to set up in part of its governance, and the management board. So the management board will be led by Chief Operating Officer and Clinical Lead. The pathology board will be the chair and I, as just outlined. So it was a mix-up in the way the paper was presented. Apologies.
Okay. And then are people happy to approve the minutes held? Yep, thank you. And we'll move on to item 134, the action sheet. And Paul, can I ask you to take us through that quickly, please? Anything to bring to our attention?
There's nothing to be brought to your attention. We now have indicative due dates for a number of the items on there, which we were asked to review at the last board meeting, with a number of items either scheduled for today's meeting or with a narrative update, with other items included on the board agenda, Mike. So there are no exceptions to bring to the board's attention at this time.
Thank you. Colleagues, happy to accept the action sheets, matters arising. Thank you. So we'll move on then to matters for consideration. Paper 135, the patient and staff story. Jackie, are you going to introduce this item, please?
So I'd like to welcome Mel Woolfall, who's our Associate Director of Nursing for Medicine across the Big Bay. And what we wanted to do today was to bring to you both a patient and staff experience around our stroke services. So we've heard a lot about our stroke services with the Section 31 notice we got from the CQC inspection and the developments that we have done over time in these last few weeks. I think there's a really good story to tell here. I'm not going to rain on Mel's parade by going into any of it, but I think there's some really good improvements that you'll see through this story. So Mel, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Okay, yeah, so we just wanted to share a kind of summary update and then some work that we've done around staff and patient experience. So as you're all aware, we had a CQC inspection of stroke services in April, followed by a Section 31 notice, which we received in May. We then commenced a improvement programme at pace, and then looked at various measures and improvements across those measures, which are pathway tracked. We've developed a dashboard and have a robust governance process through task and finish group chaired by medical director and chief operating officer, and then care group led improvement groups on a regular basis. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of our SNAP data at current position. So what this shows is an improvement on Q1 of this financial year, so April to June. We're expecting the next SNAP data to be imminently published early in November. And as you can see from this, whilst RLI remained at a D, there is an improvement in their SNAP score, and fairness have moved from a D to a C. And actually the quarter that's demonstrated here, the pace of improvement work commenced midpoint through that quarter. So we are expecting further improvements in our next SNAP data that's due to be published. Next slide, please. So just in terms of environment, so a summary of the work we've done so far. So RLI, in September, we moved to a larger footprint, having had some challenges around moving patients to our stroke ward in a timely manner. So that allowed us to have a larger footprint and make significant improvements in time to ward. The estates work is now completed across that footprint, and we've got designated acute area and rehabilitation area, so providing those patients with specific areas for the level of intervention and care that they need. There's also work ongoing around redesigning the gym area to make that a bigger footprint to allow those patients to receive their therapy in that footprint also. On the Furness site, we've also improved our estates. So previously, patients who required thrombolysis, because of the level of monitoring that they require, went to our complex and coronary care unit, but that then meant that they didn't go to the stroke ward until a period of time after their initial admission. So what we've done is redefined a bay on the ward as an acute area that's monitored, and so now all stroke patients can go to the stroke ward, which includes those that have had thrombolysis. And imminently to be opened is a therapy area on level 6. So again, enhanced estates for patients on our Furness site so that they can receive therapy close to the ward area. Next slide, please. So we felt that it was a good opportunity to now look at patient experience and staff experience of the improvement work that we've been undertaking. So we've done a survey with both, and we're going to continue to do that, so we continue to capture their thoughts and we can progress with improvements in the services. So in summary, the patients that were asked about their experience felt that the care they received had been good, and one patient described the staff as amazing. All patients felt that they'd been included in the decisions about their care and treatment. However, one patient did feel that the level of clinical support workers needed increasing because of the demand of work. Now, we are doing work around staffing reviews, and we've done significant amount of work for our stroke services, but actually looking at those peripatetic roles and how we can incorporate therapies into those support staff so that we don't define roles in different groups, and we have a workforce that is flexible and adaptable to the needs of the patients and can provide a variety of different skills. And one patient was struggling to sleep because the lights in the bay had been turned off at night, but the lights in the corridor have to remain on for safety. So we're reviewing that continually and checking with other patients to make sure that they're not receiving the same disturbance of sleep, and looking at opportunities of how we could improve that in the environment. So some patient feedback specifically, so really positive feedback there in green around a patient's experience of having their stroke care across the acute through to the rehabilitation and the optimisation of that therapy in the early days. So actually it helps regain support and confidence. And then just a couple of things that we've picked up around patients, and whilst they're receiving therapy, there are periods of time where they are inactive, and it's what we can do to support them and provide other things that that help them not feel bored, but stimulate them as well. So we're reviewing that in line with the footprint and then the improved gym area to see what we can do to improve that. And again, with that constant feedback, I would anticipate seeing some improvements in that. So in terms of staff experience, so because of the pace that we had to work at in terms of making the improvements, there is always a risk there that staff don't feel that they're involved and supported. So we felt it important to capture their thoughts. So they felt supported by their manager. This is across both sites. They felt that staff worked well as part of a team, and that managers listened to them and shared the information with them. And they also felt that they've been able to contribute ideas for service improvement. So we've tried really hard to have regular conversations with staff and capture their thoughts on how they feel the improvements would help for them and for also their patients. So this is just some feedback on the improvements that we've made and the staff's involvement in them. So moving to a larger ward and a therapy space, they felt is a real positive impact, and the involvement in that. Development of a communication bedside to facilitate better communication. So that's directly with the ward, therapy staff and patients that's been undertaken. They've been actively involved in dysphagia training for ED staff so that we ensure that dysphagia screening happens on attendance in ED. We've engaged in discussions for the new level 6 therapy area at the Furness site, and the weekly breach meetings which we commenced. They were already up and running at Furness, and we've commenced an identical one at the Lancaster sites that runs weekly and captures all the elements of good practice in terms of stroke care and treatment, and where we might have missed something or something's not as it should be, understanding the learning. And that's an MDT meeting, so encompasses radiology, ED and the therapy teams as well as the ward team. They've really appreciated the involvement in the working group and understanding the time to scan, dysphagia screening and time to ward, and the consultant review, and how we've worked to improve those elements. And just commencing shortly is Feedback Friday. So it's around harnessing that staff engagement to ensure that we've got clear communication, but also celebrate the improvements. So it's not just about telling people where things haven't gone well, it's about where we have made improvements, or capturing where staff have got some really good ideas and how we can harness those to improve care and treatment for patients. And that's everything from me. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Aaron, start with you.
Yeah, very quick, Mel. Thank you for that. It was a really good presentation, some reflections back that takes us out of the data a little bit and more into the experiential side of the improvement work we've taken forward. There's just some themes for me that I'd like to kind of share with the board and then for the executive team to pick up as we progress our own improvement journey. So stroke, it was very hard at the outset of this improvement work to kind of call out the good work that was progressing, because it was so disappointing that we found out, in my words, through an external inspection that the service was in the condition that it was. So for me, the work that we've been doing with the Good Governance Institute and the operating model review is going to be designed to make sure that this cross-care group, this thematic view of multidisciplinary approach to those pathways that don't sit neatly in a team, we take that learning into other areas of our service improvement. So that's for me a reflection of some changes we'll make structurally to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a place where something like this surprises us again. And the other theme that I'll draw out is what happens when we bring the right colleagues together with the right permission, the right resource and some impetus. The pace of change and the way that that gets delivered shifts gears exponentially. So again, when we're talking about the recovery support programme later today or our approach to improvement work, these are some themes that you'll see feature in the core principles that we want to kind of keep hold of and spread. And my last point is an offer to any non-executive directors. It'd be great to see you out and about on the wards again. Maybe go out and see the stroke unit, maybe onto Med Unit 2. I know Jill, you went out this week with Jackie. That's an offer I think would be great to see you guys out and about and seeing patients and staff again.
Thank you. On that final point, Aaron, Paul, can the Neds contact you, please, so that we can arrange these visits? Then we can go into the stroke units.
Yeah, of course, Mike.
Thank you. Mel, just a quick one from me. You talk about you're going to review the feedback from both from patients. You know, you talked a little bit about the freedom space and people being bored. How will you know that that's having an impact on patients? Will you use further patient feedback or?
Yeah, so when now we've done the initial questions for staff and for patients, the plan is to do that on a continuous cycle so that we capture where we've made improvements and where we think something might have made an improvement. Actually, is that the reality for the patients and staff? So it's about capturing that live data. So I would anticipate that we will do that on a monthly basis so that we've got an ongoing review of the improvements.
Thank you. And Malaska, is there anything you want to bring to the board around pace? I do feel the pace is fast enough.
Yes, I think it. Yes, I do. I think it's the structure that we put in place to enable the improvements has really worked well in terms of that cross-care group 3 times a week meeting. We've reduced that to twice a week now, but it was 3 times a week until the end of September, beginning of October. And then the task and finish group, because that enabled us to unblock things that we were struggling with from an exec perspective. So I think challenging to run at that pace, but it definitely has helped us with speeding up those improvements.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Jill and then Bruce. Jill?
Thank you, Mel. And yes, I visited Mel yesterday, so I pre-warned her that I was going to ask a really difficult question. So I've been awake all night worrying. I have to say that the staff have made some amazing changes, both in the medical wards and the stroke, and they have been absolutely focused on improving that patient experience. And I was so impressed. So a big thank you. And from the Quality Committee, and you'll have seen in the papers today, that a root cause analysis was reported to the Quality Committee on why we didn't know about all these issues to do with stroke. We knew lots of them, but not all of them until CQC went in and then they reported it to us. And Yvonne Evans has done a fantastic report on that, which has made me, as chair of the Quality Committee, really reflect on what I personally could have done differently. And we talked about it yesterday with the care group triumvirate, and they will get a copy of the report so they can own it too. But my question for Mel is, so through this improvement journey, what have you personally learned, and what do you think the board still need to know that maybe we don't know?
In relation to stroke or
anything?
Okay. So personally, I think that cross-care group working and the mechanism by which we set that up has worked really well. And I think we certainly, when we identified issues with care of the elderly, did the same thing, so that we could mirror what we'd done in terms of stroke. I think personally, it's the fine balance from a nursing perspective of ensuring that your staff are involved in those changes when you're trying to work at pace, because it's very, very easy for people to feel disengaged or that like they're being done to. So I think personally for me, it's that early engagement and discussion with staff.
That's really terrific.
And in terms of board, I think it's probably where things are discussed and raised, maybe unpicking those and asking more questions, and some of them greater detail maybe would be the ask.
Thank you. Thank you. Good response, Mel. Thank you. Bruce?
Yeah, Mel, thank you for the presentation, and yourself and your colleagues for the service improvements. We get a kind of almost a regular stroke dashboard information, and you can see from the figures there that things are improvements. So well done on that. The question I really want to know is, what do you still feel are the challenges in strokes, and what the risks are that we as board members need to be aware of?
So I think top of that list would be COVID and pandemic and winter, and what that's going to look like in terms of outbreaks and how we then manage that stroke pathway in a safe way. And I think maintaining the pace and oversight of the work that we've done so far, and ensuring that we have a sustainability that is achievable.
Thanks, Mel.
Thank you. I'll just check.
Yeah, just quickly on the issue of risk, particularly the exposure through winter and dealing with the COVID disease. Just to cite board colleagues again, so Kate brought through a recent revised updated protocol that we're following through winter around how we manage services through the winter period. We've got an escalated risk review at the trust management group around managing kind of as the surge of activity now is on us. So just to remind board colleagues that risk we've got a mitigating plan around, and we obviously manage that through the daily safety site meetings and the goal on call infrastructure. I think it's cognizant for us to keep this on the board's agenda as we progress through what is likely to be a difficult period. So we'll use the IPR to highlight any risks on performance through the board to address that.
And would it be useful, colleagues, if we ask Mel and colleagues to come back in a few months, give us a further update? Happy with that? Yeah. Jackie, you okay with that one? Yeah. Mel, on behalf of the board, thank you. That was a really good presentation. I'll ask Jackie to end the session.
Yes, so I think Mel's described very much the importance of having the patient and staff experience as part of those improvements. I think we can see the staff engagement in there. I think we can see them moving forward with the fundamentals of care, and really understanding the care they're delivering and why they're delivering it in the way that they are doing. I think there's been great leadership around that from the triumvirate team, and a real tenacity about making sure these changes happen for the benefit of our patients.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mel. I'm going to move on to the next item now.
Thank you.
I'm sure colleagues around the table look forward to seeing you when they do the visit.
Thank you.
Cheers, Mel.
Okay, colleagues, we'll move on very quickly. Item 136, If I can just bring your attention to paragraph 5, there's either a Freudian slip or a spelling error on the last sentence where it says everybody's working together to elevate as much of this pressure as possible. You should say alleviate. It's my writing or a subconscious slip. So just to bring you there. But there it is. I think some of the important items there are on today's agenda, and I've alluded to that in my report. An item 4 there, paragraph 4. Paul, I know that your office is coordinating visits and things, and it's early days yet, and I'll talk to you about how we can refine it. But all the NEDs are aware that we'll be keeping records of the visits so that we have some evidence of visits and also a record of what we need to follow up, etc. So I'll work with you on that. But the visits have started, and I know some of you have been there. Those that you haven't, we'll make sure when I speak to Paul afterwards. And then CQC and transformation within the board papers, and then the final remarks. Again, a little typo error. Paragraph 12, the culmination niche work within the trust is due for publication imminently, and we'll speak as a board when that is published. But happy to answer any questions on the chair's report. No? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to the Chief Exec's report, item 137.
Thank you, Chair. So 3 areas that I'll update the board on today. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the CQC inspection report that's been published today into our medical services on the RLI site. Then I'll give a quick update on some items that I've been covering as a Chief Executive in the last period, which will feature also on the agenda, so not too much about those. And then some key leadership changes and functional changes in the executive team that I need to cite the board on as part of my report. So firstly, colleagues, we have received today the formal publicised report of the CQC inspection into medical services on the RLI site. This is attached to the inspection activities that commenced with us in April and May of this year as part of the well-led inspection. And the CQC chose to come back and look again at our medical services at RLI as a result of some of the work they did in that first inspection, particularly around medical services like urgent care and stroke. So the report as it's published today, we fully accept. It's pleasing to see the CQC have reflected back lots of the engagement work and improvement work that we've been taking since that April-May period. Disappointing that we haven't managed to achieve as much as we'd like over that period and sustained it as well as we'd like, to the effect that the CQC could sign that off as having been delivered and sustained. The areas that are highlighted in this report are similar to those that were pulled out in the full inspection around responsiveness and well-led, particularly around staffing, pressures, policy and protocol adherence around governance and assurance, and in the well-led it's the risk management elements. So these are all common themes we've been working on as a board and as a leadership team over the last 4 or 5 months. And this report highlights again the importance of getting those improvement pieces delivered and sustained quickly. I'm conscious that this inspection was carried out on the 3rd and 4th of August, so 2 or 3 months ago. And you just heard firsthand, both from non-executive director's visit, executive lead officer in Jackie's feedback, and Mel from a care group, in one of those areas in particular in stroke. Fantastic progress made by the teams and demonstrable improvement, evidence-based on how that improvement's delivering. I'm absolutely confident that this leadership team and the triumvirates that are owning these plans are on the same path of that integrity, tenacity and pace to deliver quickly. The overall report does not have an impact on the overall Royal Lancaster Infirmary rating that was published as part of the full inspection, nor does it have an impact on the overall rating of the trust. But we remain committed to delivering the improvement work that's highlighted again in this report. I'm happy to take any questions on the CQC element there, Chair.
I'll just pause there. Anybody, any questions around the CQC? Sarah?
Thank you. You commented that this really needs those programmes to be seen through to conclusion. So what would you say as being the timeline for that? And so that, for example, the next time the CQC might come, could have assurance that we're much more likely to be able to improve our rating?
So some of these issues we're going to pick up in the recovery support programme delivery. So for those that have what I would call leadership and management actions that can get rapid improvement for quality and safety or operations like stroke, over the next 3 to 6 months, we should be able to deliver all the things that we've got in there on the, what I would call the must-do elements. Some of the wider elements of governance and leadership, like assurance and risk management, or lessons learned and incident reporting, whilst we've made some structural changes quickly as part of the Good Governance Institute work, I think it's 6 to 12 months for us to be able to demonstrate that they are sustained and embedded, and there's been an impact on the outcomes as a result. So not that there's any delay in the pace of delivery, but in order for us to provide assurance here at board and also for any regulators, I think some of those longer terms, you're looking at 6 to 12 months in terms of the sustainability agenda. So,
Thanks.
I'd just like to recognise the really positive step forward in terms of the single improvement plan and the opportunities that that provides. And I'm just thinking about if you could just share with us your thoughts about how that might lead to improvements in terms of streamlining of further groups, activities, and potentially better use of resources.
So I'll say a little bit about the approach, but then I'll hand over to Chris as the SRO for the RSP, who might want to say a few words about the approach that have been taken. So I think the streamlining and the structural change, we've completed that work, if you will, with the Good Governance Institute. So some of the issues that are presented as a result of complex governance structures or in strokes circumstance where it's a pathway approach that's needed in terms of review and not a care group approach. We'll sign off those pieces of work this month through the final PDSA cycles and report to board, so the board's clear as to what that now looks like and how we will get assurance using our audit programs and how effective they're working. In terms of leading to a more focused improvement and getting to the areas quickly, I think we'll get into that a little bit on the RSP agenda item. But Chris, is there anything you want to highlight at this stage?
We will get to it on the RSP agenda item. One of the things I'll say is we'll be reporting how we've brought together and consolidated things like the outstanding actions from the competent action plan into one place, and specifically identified whether there are things that don't fit within the focused priority areas of the recovery support programme. And that's really key in this, isn't it? Focused priority areas of that. That we've got a really clear line of sight of what those are and how they're going to be delivered so that it's not scattered. So I think that's quite important. I think the other thing is that the time that we've spent to do the stock take and work with the exec SROs has really enabled us to filter out things that weren't core to the improvement piece. And I think that when we finally set out the components of the work stream, I hope you'll be able to recognise how that focus is applied in reality through those programmes of work, and that's clearly our view of where we're getting to.
Thank you. So just on that, is there a timeline to that comment about getting to?
Yeah, so we're presenting our outline position around the programme of work, but not the detailed position tomorrow at the system improvement. From here, it's just about compiling it now. We've completed our stock take, and it's about full mobilisation now. So that at the end of this month is the end of that period, and we're into that phase now.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, any other questions, the Chief Exec, on that part of the report?
No, thank you, Chair. So last two items very quickly. So there are a number of areas that I've highlighted in the report that feature on the agenda today. So things like the recovery support programme and the improvement plan, the refresh of our purpose and vision work, H2 planning and the Q2 review, and our recommitment to our anti-racism programme under our cultural improvement piece. So I won't say too much under my report there, because we will spend time on them as a board on the agenda. The final part of my update, Chair, is if I have some key leadership changes to cite the board on. So Kate Maynard, the Chief Operating Officer, has announced her intention to retire, despite our best attempts to try and persuade her otherwise at the end of the year. Kate will leave with our love and best wishes and a recognition of the tenacity and commitment she's applied to the Chief Operating Officer role over a really difficult period. But that's 5 months away or 4 months away, and will embarrass her at a more appropriate time later in the year. We will be out to advert for the Chief Operating Officer's role this week. We'll be looking to run the same engagement process that we do as exec appointments and served us well in the past, including stakeholder groups and panel interviews to get partner input on that. I've already put on record my thanks and the team's thanks for Dr. Barry. We will welcome Jane McNicholas as the medical director, who arrives on secondment for 12 months on the 1st of November, 1st of December. And what we've noticed, the 1st of November, no, I was right first time.
You were
I was right first time, sorry, thank you, Jackie. So the 1st of November, one of the changes that I need to highlight to board though is the role of the responsible officer. So Jane will complete a responsible officer training later in November. So in the interim, Peter Dyer, the previous responsible officer, will pick up the responsibility for a month from Shahidul, and Jane will pick that up in December once completion of the training has happened. So just to make that point, Chair.
Just pause there if you don't mind, Aaron. Paragraph 35 of your report saying that what you've just outlined in the responsible officer's role, you seek the board's approval to enact this change. So I'll just pause there so that we get formal board approval. Everybody comfortable with that? And we could minute that as such. Thank you. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you. Okay, so next is to welcome Richard Sachs as the Director of Governance, who also joins us on Monday, the 1st of November. Richard joins us from Bolton already. In his interim handover, is providing some insight and contribution to things like our governance and assurance improvement work. So really looking forward to Richard joining us on Monday. And then final update is an agreed start date for Bridget Lees. The incoming Executive Chief Nurse will be the 1st of January. I'm just talking to Jackie about the arrangements up until then around covering the Chief Nurse role, which Jackie has kindly offered to do up to this point for us and has provided some great leadership. With that is going to come a change in our freedom to speak up arrangements, which was previously led by an Executive Medical Director. I am making the change to move the portfolio of freedom to speak up oversight from an executive perspective to Bridget in the Chief Nurse role. And in the interim, I will pick up the role of Executive Lead for Freedom to Speak Up, working with Bruce as the lead NED and with Heather and Wes as the guardians over the next 8-10 weeks until Bridget arrives, Chair. And that's all I have to say.
Any questions or comments on the Chief Exec's report? No. Okay, colleagues, then we'll move on to paper 138, page 47, the Recovery Support Programme, Deputy Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. The summary report is pretty concise. It serves as confirmation of the Trust's formal proposals for the Recovery Support Programme exit criteria. Just a reminder, this is the basis by which it's proposed that we will determine that we, through the Recovery Support Programme, have implemented our plans and delivered the improvements consistent with the Trust no longer being deemed as a segment 4 Trust within the construct of the National Single Oversight Framework. The exit criteria set out within the paper is the one submitted to the Trust and to NHS, submitted by the Trust to NHS England Improvement on 15th of October following consultation with board members. This will now be formally considered through the System Improvement Board and through NHS-EI. I'm pleased to be able to report to the board that we have now established, as I've already mentioned, our process of transition and or closure for remaining items from the previous composite action plan. 12 outstanding actions which are not captured within our forward improvement plan will be specifically monitored and reported through the Quality and Safety Committee, and from there closed through the Trust Board and the System Improvement Board. So we have retained a clear line of sight on those matters. All other items have been reconciled against the improvement work within the context of the new consolidated work streams which form the basis of the Recovery Support Programme, and importantly incorporated within the revised governance and oversight arrangements approved by the board in September. In respect to the Recovery Support Programme, all CQC improvement actions are now connected to specific improvement plans which have been developed in collaboration with relevant care groups and clinical teams, and any immediate concerns have been addressed or mitigated. Every recommendation has now been assigned to and agreed with a responsible executive lead. Approval of the Trust's resource application to the support programme has also now been confirmed. And in addition, I'm pleased to be able to report that the Trust has secured some additional support for a defined piece of work in respect of its sustainable financial improvement agenda. This will help us This will help us to provide objective clarity in respect of the Trust's underlying financial challenges and to determine our 3 to 5 year financial improvement trajectories. This is important in the context of the RSP in particular because it's an innovative and rigorous approach, and it will provide substantive support and tangible evidence to demonstrate the connection between the financial and the clinical sustainability piece through the quality and safety improvement agenda that we're committed to. So it's a big step forward, and it's a very positive bit of update for the board today. Other than that, I'll take questions.
Thanks, Chris. Steve?
Thanks, Chris. Previous board meeting, I expressed some concern over one of the exit criteria relating to the clinical strategy, that it seemed to depend on activities outside the trust. It looks to me as if that's been tightened now, and that it's now all within our gift, as it were. Is that correct?
Certainly what we looked for was to maintain connections externally, because we recognise we can't do a clinical strategy without those connections. And importantly, the exit criteria is helpful to us in terms of defining what we would expect to see from our clinical strategy within place-based and the wider provider collaborative work. So I think the way that it's formed is the way that we would like it, and of course that reflects the fact that we established that sixth work stream in the RSP, the clinical strategy. So I think so.
So just to be clear, it's within our gift to achieve the conditions for that criteria.
That's right. And the connection to external pieces of work is about the expectation that the core components are visible through those.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, and I raised it informally with you some similar issues, and I appreciate seeing those taken up. I've got a couple of points. One's very, well, possibly very minor. The evidence that, I think it's the 5th or the 6th criterion, evidence of UHMBT priorities in the South Cumbria System Development Plan and Alignment and Clinical Strategy. I assume is there a Lancashire missing from that? Or is there a South Cumbria System Development Plan on its own?
There is the Lancashire missing.
I've noticed that throughout, yes. And I think that's probably quite a key.
Not intentional here. We haven't.
No, I just think it's probably quite a key omission, because I was scratching my head, working in South Cumbria, trying to work out what the specific development plan for that I might have a role to play in. So that was just a minor point. The second one is probably an impossible question to answer, but it's useful to just raise. Is there any sense of how long this is going to take us, like to achieve the criteria and to move out of this intense scrutiny?
I have a sense, but I don't want to start guessing.
No.
And what I would rather do is, through the presentation of the plan over the next month in the detail of the work streams, provide a more objective response to that, Hugh. If that's okay. I know that's kicking the ball down the road a little.
No, I think it's an important question to ask, but I understand that answer.
What it certainly is that we're expecting our recovery support programme to operate this year in line with the resource that we've got, and we're expecting a conversation about next year's resource as well.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Thank you. You've probably discussed this previously, so I'm just coming to this fresh, I suppose. Where in the exit criteria do we see that financial sustainability coming through? Because it doesn't feel obvious to me. I can see it's mentioned under, I think, 5, but I just wondered if you could explain that in a bit more detail. We know how that affects.
So the financial sustainability piece itself is of course an underpinning piece across all of the pieces of work, and it was our introduction of sustainable financial improvement to this programme of work that led to it being there. In terms of where it is, it's fundamental, of course, to the conditions associated with the within the sustainable clinical strategy. So the sustainability is a line that we always repeat: is you can't have clinical without financial, and vice versa. So and you'll see there that that particular part of the criteria references a system financial plan, which of course our financial improvement trajectory has to be part of. And in fact, our financial improvement trajectory will increasingly be discussed and agreed at a system level first. So that's our fundamental component of exit criteria.
So if I could just comment on that, I think just where I come from, if we talk about sustainability, we'd be talking, for example, about environmental sustainability or sustainability in the round. So I understand these are signed off. I suppose my reading of this would be, for someone who's not so familiar with the terminology, whether having that financial element in is useful.
I understand the point actually, albeit alongside the exit criteria, we will now specify the metrics and the assurance arrangements, which will provide a great degree of clarity about that. So we will be now setting out the assurance framework that shows how we're meeting the criteria, and at the moment you're only seeing the criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so that was where I was going to come from, is actually how we're going to monitor this and who's going to do the marking, so that we don't get, sidetracked thinking we're doing a great job and we're well on the journey, we're hitting all the key milestones. But actually, when somebody else externally comes in and scrutiny through a hard, cold lens, that we're way off track.
That's built into the design of the recovery support programme. So first of all, we have the governance process that we presented to the board last week, so that we have these exec-led work streams which report to a programme board, which has membership from various people across the organisation, but also CCG partners, and of course the colleagues from the intensive support team throughout it, and of course we're also doing some other membership, including staff side reps. So we're trying to get a broad frame of reference within there. And remember, the programme itself was built around the establishment of clinical reference groups to really test this stuff as we go. So the programme board has its scrutiny and reports to the trust management group and to the quality and safety committee, the output which comes to the trust board. All of this is overseen at a system improvement board level. So we get that triangulation because the CQC are in the room, a regional team are in the room, and various other partners. We're also designing the assurance framework to look for the evidence that suggests the assurance we've got isn't right, rather than just rely on finding evidence that says it is. And I hope that we'll be able to describe specifically how that looks. So we are building this to provide that assurance that actually some of the reports that led to us having a recovery support programme said that was short.
Adrian. Quick point then. So it is the question. It is that how do we know that we've hit the exit criteria? What measures do we use? And how do we objectively then demonstrate to whoever needs to, board first and then external, that we can say that we've achieved what we set out to achieve? Some of the exit criteria are definitive, having addressed all of the historical kind of regulatory asks, addressing appropriately current regulatory asks like the CQC. Things like financial sustainability, they weren't part of the driver, when we were talking about recovery support programme, but they feature in the SOF 4 rating, and it would be odd, wouldn't it, if we didn't attach our financial sustainability strategy to quality and safety improvements and the other improvement work. But it's not as clear as saying, well, if you hit this deficit position in 12 months, you're off. And I know that's where people are trying to it isn't that at the moment. So we just need to recognise that we're taking this into a conversation with the System Improvement Board. The governance arrangements are internal System Improvement Board, and I've asked Chris to talk to our audit function, MIA, to apply some internal audit scrutiny to the programmes of work that we design. But I suspect when we do things like our 22-23 plan, the trajectories that we agree are part of the financial sustainability strategy and the system will become part of the marking scheme for the RSP. So we haven't got it yet, and it is likely to feature, but I understand the question on, so at what point in our deficit journey do we step off from a financial perspective?
Adrian? Thank you, Aaron. You've actually answered the majority of my question, but the key thing for me is, because I now understand the complexity around robust actions, robust implementation, robust measures of impact, and also the MOT test. Is it good on the day, or is it going to do 10,000 miles? And it's that last bit really, because it's the 10,000 miles, it's the sustainability and the consistency of the service and the improvement that we perhaps can't evidence as well as we might want to. And with that, there's going to be a timeline and a lag, isn't there? And so in terms of these criteria, do you feel that's going to be led, the achievement of that criteria is going to be led by evidence of continued impact and service improvement? Because that, in that case, being released from these criteria feels like that's going to be some time away.
Yes and yes. So we will absolutely, in the way that the RSP is designed, include not only evidence of things being delivered, but that the outcomes that we expected that action to change have also been changed. And then we have part of our audit functional work is to go back and ensure that that has been sustained. Now, I think there is a dialogue to be had with the System Improvement Board and with the regional and national teams about at what point is there assurance enough that the soft 4 criteria would not apply to this organisation if someone came and inspected us today, which is different to demonstrating. So let's say, for example, one of our evidence pieces might be staff survey results being sustained in a certain area, like it's run annually. I don't want to be in a soft 4 and RSP criteria for 2 or 3 years. And I don't think neither with the best will in the world do Caroline and Lorna, because you know there's other trusts that will want their support and their leadership as well as they make their own improvement journeys. So I think there's going to be a debate around a satisfactory assurance level for soft 4 not to apply anymore. But that sustainability piece, particularly for the likes of the CQC and us as a board, we will want to retain in our assurance structure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Any further questions? Just a couple.
Just following up on that, Chair, this is where it gets quite difficult, isn't it? And it's where's the bar set? And what other external measures come in terms of setting that bar around CQC and so I think we shouldn't underestimate that at the moment as those criteria are set there, there's still, as I think as Chris alluded to, and you definitely have got a lot of work to really understand where the bar is. And obviously that bar will be at a level at which we don't want to stay at, but it will be a level at which we're, if you like, released from a lot of scrutiny, but our issue is about moving forward to higher levels of robustness, if you like, because robust is a very you get your head around really as it stands. So I think we just need to recognise that this at the moment seems to be still a little bit unsure, but hopefully as we move forward it become clearer and clearer.
Okay, colleagues, and we're asked to note the agreed exit criteria, 7 of them, and discuss and approve the improvement plan. I'm assuming, reading this, Chris, that you mean the improvement plan for the exit criteria, not the bullet points under paragraph 7 around quality, safety, regulation, leadership.
That's right. So we will be bringing the detailed improvement program plan next time.
Yeah, thank you. So are you happy with that? Yeah, colleagues, and you've told us about the intensive support program budget, so we note that. Okay, colleagues. Okay, before we move on to item 139, I ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Jess Reed and I'm one of the maternity improvement advisors working with my colleague Dr. Marie Lewis, who couldn't be with me this morning. And you've invited us, or myself, to this morning to share initial insights around the diagnostics that we've undertaken on the maternity safety support programme, the journey that we're starting with you, and also some timeframes regarding this programme. So I just wanted to check that you received the presentation in your papers. So that's excellent, good. So if I
could just stop you there. You're the next item after the next item.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
No, I was going to launch into. So I hope I haven't stopped you in mid-flow.
I don't have your programme in front of me, so
well, we know who you are. You know who we are. We know that you sent papers in advance and it's been
Excellent.
confirmed that we've got them. So I'll just deal with item 139 and then in item
Of course,
14
my
I'll bring you back in.
apologies, I'm so
Don't worry.
sorry.
don't
Chair's
worry.
fault, Chair's story.
It's good to see you, and I see colleagues on Teams as well, so welcome. So strategic refresh, purpose and vision, Director of OD, David.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Chair. Whilst this has got my name on the item to present, this is actually the work that Phil Woodford, as Director of Corporate Affairs, has been leading on. So I'm just presenting it on his behalf in his absence today. The purpose and vision, the strategic refresh, has been through a series of initial engagement events, which including at the previous board and work outside of the board. This has hopefully been taken now to the point of being good enough to share and finalise through wider engagement with internal, external stakeholders and colleagues, which Phil Woodford has got lined up ready to implement in throughout November, with a view to then bringing back the final purpose and vision in November's board. So asking you to sign it off today as good enough for the next stage of engagement, please.
Seems very concise, David. Thank you for that. So we are asked to note the continued development and oversight of the CNST safety actions for year 3 and 4.
Are you still on item 140?
I am on item 140. Yeah. Sorry.
Bye, Kieran.
Myself, 139. Forgive me. So a good deal of engagement, right? Recommendations for us. Note the work to create the draft purpose and vision.
Yeah.
Yeah. Approve the draft purpose and vision and strapline. Yeah, thank you. Approve and support the next stage of consultation with colleagues, governors and local stakeholders. Sarah?
Thank you. Just and again, I'm playing catch up on this, aren't I? Because I've missed the previous discussions. I've just had a couple of observations on the purpose and the vision. On the purpose, it just felt to me that health is missing from there, and maybe that's been discussed and decided against. But when we talk about the best possible results for the people of Morecambe Bay, I think we're talking about health outcomes, aren't we, and not about education or work outcomes. So it's just a question really about whether health might be in there.
So that has been through 3 or 4 discussions. Fine. We're trying to get the balance right, and it will come through engagement with wider partners. We've made commitments to be an anchor institution to give benefit to the local population because of our role, and we're trying to find a purpose that allows us as a board to kind of deliver in that agenda, recognising that our core business is health and care, but we've also made a commitment as a system partner to operate in that space. It is a dialogue we've had quite a few times before, but yeah, so it's the right question to ask, but it has been a dialogue previously. It's likely to feature, I would suggest, in the ongoing engagement over the next few weeks.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And just, just my second point on the vision, it seems very long, and it just struck me, particularly the last sentence is more about the how than the what or the why. And to me, that would be a supporting driver or a supporting strategy that goes with it. So I think that would be my comment, especially in the context that the vision is quite long.
Suggest we pick that up as part of the ongoing engagement.
Yeah, might just give those, if we could minute those feedback, Paul, and then pass them on to Phil's team. Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, I think David made a good comment on the way into this. This is a continuous process. Board's being asked whether this is good enough for the next stage of consultation. So personally, I think it is, but share some of those reservations.
I think the key word is draft. Yeah. So it's still in draft stage. Okay, and the final point is support the receipt of the proposed final purpose and vision for the November Trust Board. Colleagues happy with that? Thank you.
Is that going to give time for the engagement?
It's a lot of work already.
Is that right? A lot. Because that really only gives about 3 weeks.
Yeah. Ready for November? Okay. Yeah. Colleagues, thank you. Forgive me for jumping ahead to item 140. So I was so excited about the presentation. So we're now on item 140.
So if I may just start off, and I think this is a really important point for the Trust now, because we're actually seeing our midwifery leaders coming to the board to present to us their work. I think where we've been in the past is not having them here in the board, and it is a requirement for them to come to the board. So we've set that process off. Obviously, it's Carol and Tamsin's very first board meeting, so I think they're feeling, a bit of stress in there about presenting to you. But I know they'll do a great job. They've worked so hard on getting their paper together and to be able to do it. But before we start that, I'd just like to introduce Jess, and I know she's introduced herself to you. So I thought if we start at the national level and the support of the MSSP for our services in maternity, and then move on to the more local level and some of the dashboard development that we've been doing, I thought it would give a flavour of where we're going. So I'm really happy now to hand over to Jess to do a presentation.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Thank you, everybody, and apologies for misunderstanding earlier. So you know who I am, Jess Reid, Maternity Improvement Advisor here on behalf of NHS England and Improvement, and here for Dr. Marie Lewis and Donald Peebles, Professor Donald Peebles, who's working with us as obstetric advisor. And I've been asked to come this morning to really highlight the time frame for the board so that you understand a little bit about the journey of the MSSP programme in terms of time frames, and also to highlight our early diagnostics. So we came in, and the next slide would be useful here. And I've done the introduction, and you can see it because it's in your papers. So the next slide, please. Thank you. So the times we have loosely put on this slide for your awareness. So we came in on the 20th of August, and we presented the MSSP programme to Aaron and colleagues, and started our diagnostic journey from that point, and have been coming up to Morecambe Bay and spending time with staff, with the senior team, to get a really good understanding of where the maternity services is at. And we have been working closely with our colleagues, our obstetric advisor, Donald Peebles, and our workforce colleagues to get a good understanding of the workforce, the realistic workforce space here at the maternity service at Morecambe Bay. And you'll hear more about that from Tamsin later, and I'm not going to steal her thunder. We're also providing a culture workshop that we're going to be doing with our midwives and our obstetricians over on the Barrow site, but it will be open to all across the Bay, to really get an understanding of some of the cultural challenges that have been present on that particular site, but in some instances across the Bay. So we are intending to provide the board with our diagnostic report next week on the 3rd of November. And I'm going to just highlight some of the initial findings, and the next slide will cover that off. So we are bucketing our findings into 3 main themes. The first is leadership, the second is governance and quality, and the third is maternity vision and strategy. So those are the key themes, and talking to our the improvement director and colleagues in the trust, those are key themes across the whole trust. So I want to assure the board that all that we're doing with the maternity safety support programme, we're doing in collaboration, working collaboratively with Caroline, Lorna and colleagues across the trust with the RSP. So I'm not going to go into detail in these because they're written there for you to read and take in. And you're already aware of the challenges that have been in maternity. What is encouraging to be able to report is that there is already work underway to address some of these issues, so that when we started at the same time as Jackie started. And it's really wonderful to know that you have appointed to a director of nursing, and that you're going out for a second round of recruitment for your director of midwifery. So that's really encouraging to know. We're really keen to work. One of the pieces of work we're going to do on our next visit up here is to start work on from maternity perspective, the vision and strategy, linking in very closely with our the trust-wide colleagues that are also doing that piece of work. And governance and assurance really covers off the rest of what's on that slide. I think one of the things that we have found, and that again will be mentioned by Tamsin later, is the recognition from the board to have much more oversight of what's happening in maternity that has happened in the past. And that's a journey that you're on as an organisation, and we are on to support that improvement. So I'm not going to say any more then, because I think it's much more important you hear directly from Carol and Tamsin as to where the maternity services is at the moment. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Carol Carlisle and I'm Head of Midwifery, and I'm just going to initially cover CNST and the maternity dashboard. So I know that you've already received a paper about the CNST. So in terms of an update, we've resubmitted our compliance to being compliant with 3. So we've got 7 actions that we're non-compliant with. We've developed an action plan that we've submitted to NHS Resolution. And we are working within the team and with the support from the national team on how we are going to reach the 7 outstanding actions that we haven't been able to become compliant with. There is a recurring theme of non-compliance, and Jess has actually touched upon this, and it's lack of robust minuted evidence of board oversight. And obviously we're working, this is part of that initial plan to address that. Work is underway to ensure that we've got a robust process for year 4. And as mentioned in the previous slide, I'm actually retiring next year, but up to my retirement, my role has changed slightly, and I'm going to be Head of Midwifery Governance and Quality, and I'll be working with the governance team both within the care group and externally in the national team to look how we firm up our governance processes to make sure that we've got the compliance to CNST. So the dashboard, maternity dashboard. So in your appendix, you've got some examples of our maternity dashboard. So our local dashboard is fairly well developed. All the data that gets put into that dashboard is validated by our maternity digital midwife. That in turn then is submitted and is inputted into the regional dashboard. So what we do locally, we look at our internal dashboard through our governance, at our governance meetings, and then address any issues that we identify. And then regionally, the region produces funnel charts of outliers. That then is monitored through the Safety Specialist Interest Group through region. So what we do is we look at our local dashboard, and then we compare ourselves regionally, and so that gives us an area to benchmark. There is an example of the national dashboard in there, which is maturing. It's probably not as far ahead as we've got, and our plans are to work with the national team and the region to further develop our maternity dashboard, but also to include other metrics that we can present to board. From next month going forward, we will submit the data to region site specific, so that actually we will be able to see in terms of which area is doing what and what metrics they, if there's any outliers there, and obviously that will be picked up in region. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. I'll just pause there and ask if there's any comments or points to you.
Yeah, thank you, Carol, and thank you, Jess.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not very good with names, so I say names on my daughter, so I shouldn't forget that. So I'm really encouraged by the support program, and I welcome the things like the funnel charts, because it's really helpful to see where we stand in relation to other units, because sometimes we have it's difficult when we see all our reports in isolation. We obviously were concerned to find that we'd dropped from the position of having all 10 criteria for the CNST dropping to 3, but I think you explained a lot of that, and obviously the really important thing that's been taken out of this, that I take out of this, is that we're going to use external feedback and assurance, as well as what we get from internally. And I think that gives me a lot of assurance about that. And I think that probably links to some of the discussion we've had about the RSP and how we will be, and in other areas of the trust, about how we identify those areas that we need to identify external assurance for other areas. So my point is a general welcoming of the paper and seeing the highlighting of these issues coming to the board, but also I think there's a wider lesson and question that we need to ask about identifying those areas in the trust's performance that we should be getting some external assurance about and feedback on, but not making that an industry. So it's just being focused and understanding the areas that we really should, as a board, have that confidence. And so I think that gives us some lessons to take forward as we go forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just remind you, this is questions in relation to Carol's presentation, because Tamsin's going to do a follow-up presentation in a minute. So just remind you.
Very quickly, so there's a question. The vision and strategy for maternity services. I've started to engage a dialogue with local commissioners and ICS as part of the wider clinical strategy to ensure we've got some of that connected. So I just want to make sure that with the MSSP colleagues and care group colleagues that we're going to make those connections so we don't do it in isolation of the wider maternity picture. It's just an ask from me.
That is our wish.
Perfect. Good. Well, I've teed it up to make sure people know that we're going to be doing something. We don't want to do it kind of into isolation. The second point then is I'm really interested in benchmarking. So since the MSSP started, I've been contacting lots of people informally to try and get a sense of who's using what dashboards, what good looks like, how the benchmarking works. And it's been surprising to me how little's come back. So it feels like a really developing area for maternity services across the piece. So my question is it good enough that we benchmark with region? Is our region a particularly good region to benchmark with? I.e. would outliers show well enough for us to take action? And if not, how are we getting further insight to wider benchmarking that gives us rapid insight into where improvements might be made?
Very good question. My understanding is that the regional, there's the local dashboard, the regional dashboard, and then the national dashboard. This is all being built now, and as Carol alluded to, actually the way that your dashboard is currently sits is in a better position than the regional dashboard. So you're doing really well on that. But we have actually our regional chief midwife working with us as well on this programme, and she is spending time with Carol today to ensure that the links are what they need to be to link from the local dashboard to the regional dashboard and then into the national dashboard. So the aim is, Aaron, that you as a board will be able to ultimately have comparisons across the country. You'll have 3 different lenses, absolutely. Yeah.
And have we got a time frame for when we think that national dashboard benchmark will be available?
I will need to get back to you on that, if that's okay.
Of course.
Just to check with you and yourself, Jackie, is it all right if I move to Tamsin's presentation now?
I think Carol's got a
Carol, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, just to say that part of the national dashboard and part of Cnst, because everything's woven together, that we will be, as each hospital, asked to submit data points into the national dashboard so that by Cnst next year we should see the quality of that get better. And just as kind of a little bit of a taster, there's 11 metrics that we have to deliver. And right at the start, we can comfortably deliver 8 of them. So if we get one more, which is 9, then that's classed as in the data quality is good. So that's a bit of reassurance for the board and Aaron.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you. Thanks, Carol. Okay, Tasmin, over to you. Welcome.
Hi. Hello, thank you. So I'm Tamsin and I'm acting head of midwifery, and while Carol's focusing on governance and quality, I am focusing on workforce and operational. So you'll see from the report that we've had a Birth Rate Plus review. Birth Rate Plus is the nationally recognised tool for maternity staffing. The good news is that what they've identified is that we have enough midwives in our budgeted establishment to provide safe care. There are some areas that we just need to shore up a little bit, but there's enough wiggle room in other areas that we can move those budgets around. But, and this is a really big but, we're running significantly below establishment at the moment. So we do have a risk on the risk register, a very high rating for midwifery staffing, and that is due to both vacancies and staff absence. So we've been awarded £100,000 specifically for pastoral support, because what has been recognised is that there's a big problem with the retention of midwives. So what we're doing at the moment is we're going out and we're doing focus groups and working with the midwives to find out just exactly what it is that would keep them in work. And it's really, because it's really important how we spend that money, that it's tangible for the midwives on the ground and they can see how it's spent and they can hold us accountable for it. And the other thing just to say is that Birth Rate Plus is quite a blunt tool. So they do recognise that for small units, the peaks and troughs are such that you have to staff to a level that will accommodate the peaks. And unfortunately, women don't all give birth in a nice schedule the same amount each day. So there's a big, when you get the Birth Rate Plus report, it will come with also a professional judgment report of our staffing levels. And one of the things that we need to look at that we're required to deliver that will actually really support us with those peaks and troughs is continuity of care. And I think you've probably all heard of midwifery continuity of care, but anybody who isn't quite clear, is a complete transformation of the midwifery workforce from a shift-based model to a model where they will take a caseload of women and provide antenatal, postnatal and intrapartum care for those women. So it gives autonomy to the midwives, but it does come with a huge change of working patterns for those midwives, and there is a lot of resistance within the workforce, so it's a very big piece of transformation work. We're required to move to a model where it's the default model of care by March 2023, and we need to provide for the local maternity and neonatal system a plan of how we will get there by January 2022 that needs to be signed off by board, so that will come to December board for signing off. And the number one priority of that, because it has been recognised nationally, that in order to maintain safety, particularly maintain safety on the units with the core staffing, the number one and main thing we have to do before we even start is have our workforce at establishment. So that's what we're aiming everything at. And then the final thing just for me is just to commend to the board, for anybody who hasn't already got it, a document that came out from NHSEI in December last year called Implementing a Revised Perinatal Quality Surveillance Model, which I can share if anybody hasn't got it. And that document was written in response to maternity services nationally that were in difficulties, where they found a common theme with the variable level of board oversight. And the document very clearly sets out the board expectations. And one of them is that a monthly review of maternity and neonatal safety and quality is undertaken by the Trust Board. So we are acutely aware of how precious your time is, and we're going to be working closely with Paul Jones over the next couple of months to see exactly what we need to bring to you, both in terms of what we have to bring for regulatory reasons and also what you need us to bring to make it really meaningful. So I'd just like to say thank you for inviting us to come for our first time. And any questions?
Thanks, Tamsin. Just before I open the floor up to questions, if you could send that document to Paul. Paul, will you circulate that to all board members, please? And then we may ask for board comments on that paper in our next meeting so that we're aware that it's a live issue. And I know you're working with Paul to make sure that we'll have a monthly review, so, and the quality subcommittee as well. So we'll keep getting updates on that. I'm going to go David first.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Tamsin, and others actually for the presentation. Tamsin, I know that you were flagging recruitment issues in midwifery in particular, and there's an issue for me about aggregation in my report actually that I'm just reflecting on, because overall maternity is running at an 8% vacancy factor, which is on the rise, but it's round about what we've been coping with over the last 3 or 4 years. But when you actually get underneath that and you look at Furness, that's 12.5% at Furness. So that's much more stark, isn't it? And so, so thanks for sort of bringing to life that nuance and how it's impacting. And of course, the absence on top of that. What additional support can I give you from my team to really get that recruitment plan together? Because recruiting to midwives at Furness has never been easy. And we have that, plus we have the Ockenden investment midwives. So I just want to know what I need to do to help support you and the midwifery team.
So I've asked Jodie Tyson and Sue Alcide, our matron at Furness, to look at a recruitment and retention package. Obviously, there are ethical issues involved with that, because we do have a local trust that's put in a really good recruitment and retention package for midwives and stolen all of the midwives from the neighbouring trusts, which is good for us. But when you have a very finite resource, we need to think carefully about how we do that. So they may well come to you, and when we've got that package of what they put together, we'll come to you with that. I think it would be really good, any support you can give with the pastoral support, and how, what I'm really conscious of is I don't want that to go into some kind of management thing that we can say we did this and aren't we great, and actually the midwives on the ground haven't felt the benefit. So any support, advice or information you can give with that would be really good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go Hugh Reeve and then Liz. Hugh?
Thank you. Tams, I'm really interested and pleased to hear about the continuity of care initiative. Now it's probably a question for Jess as much as for you, because I know that continuity of care in midwifery is based on research evidence that shows that it delivers better outcomes for mothers and for babies. But you highlighted what I understand to be a national issue about the implementation of this initiative, which is around the workforce. And the intention was, as I understand it, was going to be implemented quite a while ago. But nationally, it's not been possible because of workforce issues. And given the workforce issues that we've got, particularly as you highlighted in Furness, there's a major challenge, isn't there, for this to be in place by 2023. Not only here, but I would have thought nationally as well. And perhaps Jess can give us some idea about what's going on nationally to support midwifery training and recruitment, as well as what you've just highlighted, because, you know, although I support that, I could see that it's another of those targets that could really be so challenging to meet.
So shall I take that, Tamsin?
Yeah.
Okay, and then come back to you. So just to be assured that one of the issues around the workforce challenges, it's not just the numbers of midwives. It's also about midwives saying they don't want to work in this particular way. And I think what hasn't been heard, and that does need to be heard by our midwifery workforce, is that when we are transforming our services to be providing continuity of care, there will always be a need for roughly 40–45% of our midwifery staff to still remain as core. So there will always be the opportunity for midwives who really are unable to work in the way of the flexible, autonomous way of working within teams, continuity teams. They will have the opportunity, there will always be that opportunity to remain within a shift system. So that's something that does need to be articulated nationally. The other thing to say is that we have just published the latest continuity of carer implementation guidance. And again, I will make sure, Chair, that Paul, I believe, receives a copy of that guidance, and then he can distribute it to the board members. And there are building blocks that are very clearly written in the guidance, which says that the very first thing you have to do is to get the workforce right, so the right numbers within the workforce. And I think, bearing in mind what Tamsin reported in terms of Morecambe Bay, that you actually have the right numbers, but you have a large vacancy issue. So I think it's about services and organisations understanding what are their local issues and addressing them. So Paul's, I think it was Paul, his offer to support, somebody's offer to support on an OD perspective with the recruitment and retention will be hugely valuable to the maternity team in understanding, you know, how do we attract midwives to Morecambe Bay, to the Bay, rather than going off to Preston or somewhere else.
I think it was David that offered the support.
I beg your pardon, I don't know names, but thank you.
I'm conscious of time, so I'll come back to you. I'll go Liz and Steve. But I'm conscious of time. What I'd like to do, colleagues, is deal with this item, then the next item, then have a quick comfort break before we go into performance. Liz?
Thanks, Mike. And thank you everyone for the presentation, really helpful, really useful. And my concerns always are around, are we monitoring the right things? Are we looking in the right areas, and are we getting the right information to improve services? And ultimately, this is about keeping mums safe and delivering healthy babies, isn't it? So when we look at where the UK statistics on healthy babies and safe mums, we're really poor, aren't we, against large areas across particularly Western Europe. So what are we looking at that they do that we don't? And how do we monitor ourselves against that? Because surely that should be the standard we're aiming for, rather than looking at where are the best regions in the UK, because overall the UK doesn't do well.
There are, if you don't mind me responding, there are huge challenges with how other countries collect their data. So, so there is an absolute accuracy around apples and pears being measured. So here in England, we've had a long-standing, really strong record of reporting data, accurate data from around safety and quality for mothers and babies. Other countries are recording data in different ways. And so what you see when you see the charts, where does England stand in the Europe's chart? We're way below Scandinavia and other countries. So yes, we are going over to Scandinavia, and at Better Births reports within it, the maternity strategy of a few years back now reports in it about models from Scandinavia. But when you actually go over and see what they're doing, in many ways they're in a very different place than we are in England, but they're measuring different things. That sounds like a very complicated response, to be honest. But so from a national perspective, we're doing all we can to make sure that we are measuring the right things so that we know what the outcomes are. We are being held to hit the Halve It campaign that was established by Jeremy Hunt back in 2016. So our targets are halving the number of maternal deaths, the number of neonatal deaths, the number of stillbirths, the brain injury, and so we're being held to account for those targets, and that will remain. But in terms of how we measure against other countries, it's an ongoing issue that we're working with, I guess, colleagues to look at that. But Department of Health are more interested in, are we reducing, are we hitting the Halve It campaign targets, if I'm honest, than how are we meeting the same ambitions that other countries are meeting. I don't know if that answers your question.
Sort of. We'll park it for now. It's a large area, isn't it? Not the place to get into it.
Steve, very quickly, Chair, if I might just add my thanks to colleagues for that presentation. I really found it useful. It's clear that all providers are on a journey here to meet higher standards. The thing that really struck me was this staff transformation challenge, which is something that isn't a challenge just for maternity. It'll be a challenge in other parts of the organisation. And it's an early test, isn't it, for your patient-led. Clearly, you've got to bring your staff with you, but if you're patient-led, you have to embrace these challenges and work on them. So thank you.
Thank you. Just check any further comments or final points before I go to the recommendations. No, we have two recommendations. We note the development and the oversight of the Cnst safety. Colleagues happy with that? And then taking your point, Tamsin, you know, that we've got probably 2 or 3 months to reach the January 22 deadline, and then not far off, over a year to reach the March 23 deadline. Taking that into account, you'll come back to the next board with a further iteration towards a dashboard. Colleagues happy with that? Yeah. Yes, thank you. I know you're the Deputy Chief Midwife for England, so thank you for making the journey and coming to see us in person. It's really appreciated. Thank you. Carol, I think, oh, you're there, Tamsin, I thought you'd gone then. Thank you on behalf of the board. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again in subsequent board meetings, so we can make sure this stays on the agenda as the national guidelines point that out. Thank you.
Cheers, folks. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Colleagues, thank you for that. I am conscious we are behind time, but these seemed important issues, and you know, to have the Deputy Chief Midwifery Officer for England in our presence was something I thought we should acknowledge. So that brings us nicely to item 141, which is the Stroke Improvement Progress Report. When we've dealt with this, I'll have a short break, and that'll allow us to get second wind for the performance element of the board. And I will try and keep us to time. So Kathy, I'm assuming that you're presenting this paper.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the ask of the board is really to note the contents of the 3A's report provided, and there was also a stroke improvement plan included within the pack. I think, in all honesty, you probably heard many of the things I was going to highlight in item 135, covered earlier by Mel Woolfall, but the key points I was going to highlight were that there is overall improvement in all domains, and seeing now sustained improvements, which is great to see. On a positive note, because we know staffing has been and can be an issue for us, we do have a new substantive stroke consultant starting in post at the RLI on the 1st of November. The main current challenges are probably more around nursing staffing to enable us to open the full complement of 32 beds at RLI for the stroke unit, but there is a plan and work ongoing around that with the care group and with the task and finish group. There are other challenges in terms of COVID and other infections, but that was again touched on earlier. I think the Chief Executive mentioned that those issues are addressed daily by our usual escalation routes. And yes, we await the latest SNAP data, which is due early November, and are cautiously optimistic that our scores will improve across both sites. That would probably be all I need to say, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's sort of semi-heartening, isn't it? We're sort of one step forward and see how we achieve it. But any comments from colleagues? We're asked to note the report, but any comments? No. I think you're right, Kathy. Many of the issues were really covered in the patient presentation earlier on in the agenda. But I'll just check with the Chief Exec, Chief Nurse. No?
I think Kathy's point about the Q2 SNAP data being really important, because we've been getting quite impressed by the previous one, but obviously all the work started at the beginning of quarter, sort of early in mid through Q1. So I think that's a really important point, that's probably going to be the first set of key data that will really show us.
And you're quite right, Lee.
I think that's important.
Point out that there are pressures and challenges around bed occupancy, staffing. So we need to keep an eye on that. We haven't reached our own internal targets. We're 25% off that. So we just need to be aware of that. Kathy, it doesn't look like there's any comments. Colleagues, we note the report. I think we have covered it in an earlier agenda item, and I note that. Then I will close this item. Before we go on to item 142, Roman 1, should we just stop and have a comfort break? Or how long would you like? 10 minutes. We'll reconvene at 11:45.